difficulties.
Would you try?
Are we trying again?
Yeah.
I'm back to speaking a little bit. We got sound? Nice to see these guys meeting up online.
Yeah, we've got sound now.
All right, we good?
Yep.
So you guys didn't hear my original comments. All I was going to say is this is an opportunity before we start playing this demonstration to get any conversation you want about what I've done so far. And sort of a preliminary way. We're going to do what we did last time, probably play about something like an hour's worth of the demonstration. I'm going to speak over it most of the way through, in fact all the way through, because there's some sound difficulties, so I won't be able to hear what I'm saying. And so we'll do that for about an hour, and then we'll take a break, 5-minute break, and then we'll do another hour and see where we are. In the meantime, though, any conversation you want to bring, and I'm looking now to see if there is any conversation, yeah. And so Kyle, that was my whole thing. The whole conversation was just about what we're going to be doing, which is going to be to let you guys have a bit of a chance to ask questions about what we've done so far, if there's something I can do on that in that direction. Otherwise, what's going to happen is Mr. Producer is going to just start playing the video where we picked up, the video demonstration where we picked up, where we left off, last time. And we're going to play the sound with that for a little bit just to get you back into remembering what the overall demonstration was like, and then I believe he'll probably cut it off or turn it way down, and I'll just speak over everything from that time forward, all right? And try to give you I don't know what you'd call that, the sitting up in the grandstand is giving you play-by-play of what I'm doing. So my last message is we missed your intro from Kyle. Is there anything else after that, Mr. Producer?
I think you've seen all of it.
Okay.
You want to do it to the video?
Yep. If there aren't any questions about last week or any discussion, we're going to go right to the video. I'll give you last chance for anyone to throw something out here. If you're all set to go, I'm good too. All right, let's go. Let's go, Mr. Producer. Yeah. The concept of the thing within a rectangle, you know what I mean? And so all of a sudden it's happening. He's sitting over there working on this little dinky keyboard because this major operation he's got going on with the big screens and that sort of thing is under attack, by the Unaesthetic art demons. There we go. That's looking good. That's looking good. Let's see. Well, you're starting me at the beginning of the whole thing on this one. I have a blank canvas. Oh, you're just running through it?
I'm scrubbing through it.
All right, I see what you're doing. Yeah, that's very good.
I'm going to shut off your audio.
Yep, which I can't hear anyway. All right, yeah. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, Kyle. Is there a photo of the original reference? Yeah, Mr. Producer is putting that up as we speak. He's working on it. Everything has gotten a little behind because of this little bit of a technical calamity.
Well, the computer crashed, but that was all set up to run this.
Yeah, he said the computer crashed that was all set up to run it. Can people hear what you're saying, Mr. Producer?
Quietly.
Quietly. All right.
I have to find the photo.
No, we stopped. The audio isn't cut out. You should be okay. Just be patient. There was a section in the video that didn't have sound, and that's where we picked up, unfortunately. So, yeah, just be paying attention as much as you can to what you see me doing just at this moment. You have sound now. Good. Thanks, Jim. I may have to stick my face into this. The image is very small for me today, and I don't have the big screen to look at out there. So I'll try to talk about the strokes we're looking at the moment. There would be other kinds of conversation, which, and the audio in this thing isn't working for even you guys, so as it turns out. So we'll just have to do the best we can with what we've got. What you can see that I've done, though, is I've established the top, the very highest point with a little bit of the look of nature, you know, the orangey note against that lighter yellow note, trying to establish the top. And now I'm trying to go down the side here on the left side. That's what that is. What I'm working on now is to establish a left location. Now that location is the thing that's giving me the compositional, that's the placement in the rectangle. And that's a significant placement. I'm trying to get that at such and such a distance. And the other side is, it looks like it's a similar distance. I'm not sure in the end if it will be, but I've done both sides now. Set up the top, set up something at the bottom. As you can see, those two notes, left and right, the yellow notes down there. So the bottom, though, those would be bottommost points, and the very top arc is the topmost points. And now there's a couple left and right things. And that's establishing the general proportions of what we called the ovoid last week, right? But of the arabesque, of that figure created by these points, right? And so everything we do with all these points, the points are always creating a 3D thing, right? A phenomenon. So even 3 points creates a length and a width, a two-dimensional, as it were, object. Just points do create that. And you have to get the gesture, the tilt of that general mass, that general ovoid movement, and you have to get the proportions of it. And we're doing it with real points. If you listen to Thursday's video about the ovoid and the angles, you understand the axis. You understand what I'm doing. What I have already done is I've set up the colors so that when they meet, they should produce the effect that you see on the video. The color in the I meant on the original. But that color doesn't look very plausible. The original looks all washed out. The image you have up there, is that the same image we used last time, Mr. Producer? You don't know? Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that one's correct. So it's it's not the same one, I mean, as the last one.
Just got this audio coming real loud from the recording.
Oh, it did? So that must have been one of those spots. You remember we paused the recording, or the videographer paused the recording when there's a really nasty heater comes on in my studio. So if you got blasted by that sound.
Explosion.
Yeah. Is it gone now, Mr. Producer? Does that sound gone? Okay. So we're back where we were. Now, I haven't had a chance to look at your questions. Are the notes set down currently what you would consider towards the front in the visual order? Well, the notes themselves are all notes that are key spots in certain areas, and they're all supposed to be getting righter to each other. In one sense, there's nothing more prominent about them except the most chromatic, like the orange up in the upper right. The lightest, the darkest. I'm trying to establish darkest darks and lightest lights. So, but they're not, no, the visual order is different though. Don't think of it the same way. I mean, obviously chroma will begin your eye more than neutral notes. But other than that, we're not dealing with visual order quite yet. Well, I mean to say, when I then go up there and articulate the contrast at the top or the bottom points or the side points, when I do those contrasts, those things are all supposed to be ordered visually. I'm looking to make sure those are right to each other. So the most prominent one is of that group that I'm using. The most prominent one is the most prominent, and the next one is next, and so on. So they will be in visual order, but only as the values meet each other. The effect is produced by the dark meeting the light, for the most part. And in this case, that's what you're asking, yeah. And by the way, with you guys, if you don't follow what I make, that point I make at that point, go ahead and come back with a response. Hi, Norma. And thank you, Kyle. You painted a bright green in the upper right-hand side of the canvas, then mixed on the canvas to get the right chroma. Would you please talk about mixing on the canvas versus on the palette? Yeah, well, that's the thing about this way of working. You have mixed your original note. You have that sitting on your palette. And when I put it up there, I say, oh, it needs to be more red, yellow, blue, whatever, lighter, darker. And I go down to the palette next to the note that I already set up there. And right next to it, I mix the note that I believe, when it's added to the note that's already up there, will adjust it to the right place. So if it needs to be more, it needs to be yellower, then I'm bringing it a yellow. If it needs to be yellower and lighter, I bring a lighter yellow. If it shouldn't be lighter, it should stay the same value. I try to make sure the yellow is the same value as much as I possibly can. So yes, thanks, Norma. And so everything we do is about mixing on the canvas in front of you as much as you can. All the adjustments have to be made with your eyes full of the big impression, so that all the players talking to each other. The rightness of your note has everything to do with context. So context, it means that you have all this stuff out there at one time, and now you can see that the set, all the parts talking to each other. And you can adjust them one-to-one, and you can adjust them to the whole, and you need to do both, really. So if a particular note, you're adjusting it, like you have a red and you have two other reds, if you adjust it to those other reds, that's one thing. And then you look at the whole big screen, and if it looks like the set is coherent and hanging together with the rest of the notes that are sitting out there, then you've done the next important thing, okay? Hey, Stephen, Northern Ireland, welcome. All right. Let's see if there's anything else. Keep the questions coming, otherwise I'll just keep looking at what I'm doing. I keep forgetting, Mr. Producer, that what I'm seeing on the screen is what I previously said. So confuses me sometimes. All right. So what am I looking for down there? And again, you can see this effort is to make, when you have a dark meeting a light, is to actually do that joint with the right edge quality. By the way, I'm not necessarily painting like literally the most in the visual order, in the sense that I have the most chromatic thing out there first. I'm sorry, the most powerful effect projectively. I don't necessarily put that out there first. I want to know pretty early what it is, but I'm mostly setting up the stage top, bottom, left, and right. So that's all spatial, and there's what I call that is a certain pragmatics in this. Ideally, I would paint this thing entirely simply in visual order, but there's a certain amount of placement left and right and all that sort of stuff. You have to be designing on the canvas. You have to be designing your composition. So there's a certain amount of pure pragmatics, but whenever I do it, the order of the effects is always considered as much as the color relations or the location, okay? All right, let's see where I am now. So you can see again the spots. One of the things I want to mention to you is that the spots I'm putting down there, I want to get all the life in these colors. I'm not exaggerating, but the notes, students will think that. But the notes I'm putting down, I make sure that when I look away at nature, when I look away, that the quality of life that's in these notes, which you see better slightly out of the cones, out of the outer cones, or the outer portions of your eye, of your retina, or whatever it is, that these are considered that way, not just looked at straight on. And so I'm trying to get the life in these notes that I see when I'm looking at it askance as well as looking straight at it. And then again, I'm checking them to each other so that the most chromatic notes are tuned to each other, which makes the last bit of sort of credibility for the note. Let's see what else I'm doing here. So some of the times you'll see me just moving. You see a red going there into an orange, so some of these areas, there's a movement of colors. It's not important that I do drawing down in all areas right now. There's a certain numbers of areas that need to be rather not worked on. They need to be generalized broadly, so that we're gradually eliminating the white, but not necessarily doing all the little sub-contrasts, okay, in the multiple levels below. So very, very shallow contrast between the edge of the, say, maybe is the red pot and the cloth below it, or such things as that. So let's see what else we're seeing here. Oh, let me get back down and check your questions. Jim, about paint thickness. If you wanted to push the left side of the basket further into the dark, would you rub away the dark paint or just go over it with a thicker light paint? Yeah, I wouldn't go over it. But what I have found you can do, and I'll just have you try this, is get your brush full of white and rather dig it in. Put it down in the white area and then push the lighter note away and then push all of it away and clean out your brush really good and try it again. And you'll clean your canvas that way as well as using it, as well as you might do using a rag. So you consider doing it that way. I find that more efficient frequently. Otherwise, you know, one of the arguments I make for this phase, this one day when everything's wet, is you can rag out an area if it's really that bad. But I never paint over wet and wet over a black area. I would never do that. I also don't want to have lights over darks because the lights become more transparent with time, and they'll gradually come through. The joint, the seam will come through. You can even see that on certain sergeants if you haven't seen it, if you haven't noticed it before. Have a white shirt, and he's taken the jacket and moved it out that way further, painted big white here, and later on the jacket where it used to be sitting starts showing up. It's one of those things you try to avoid. Sometimes they're so nearly unavoidable. You don't want it to, you don't want to be surprised by these things later. But it does go with the territory of direct painting. It's one of the difficulties that you have to try to make sure you overcome if possible. We were, by Gamble, encouraged to get a rag, Terps rag, and get in there and rag out anything, even on the second day, anything that was problematical in that way, any of these darks that had to have a light laid over them. So if you follow that. I hope you can follow what I'm saying. So if you don't follow what I'm saying about using a brush and with the fresh with the whites and just using those whites to push and push and push into the darks, never come back because you'll drag that dark back into the lights, but push and push away through that place until you're clear of it, and then clean out the brush really well, and then bring the whites back through one more time and push it out past where you're going to draw, and then draw wet into wet with the darks into that area. But always using, with the white or the dark, always using an amount of paint that's fairly easy to move. You don't want thick paint early, which the old classic thick over thin. You could say it should be thicker over thin, and then thicker yet is a default position, but you don't need to do that typically. And one of those things I was pointing out before is the Cardinal by Velázquez. If you get a chance to go to the Hispanic Society, it's a marvel of thinness. And yet everything you could possibly want in a painting is there. He isn't doing any bravura marks or anything like that. Any bravura, I should say, just he isn't showing off paint for paint's sake. And then that's one I recommend. You can control it. Hey, Nick. Haha, there you are, Buffalo. Very nice. Any other discussion? All right, I'll just keep looking, and I'll keep watching for your points, for your queries. Or any points you can make a point about something you see on here as best you can. I'm sorry to say this, the image we're using that I'm painting from is I think it's a little off angle, but it's also not very much. But it's also was a different kind of the values I think were better in the other version we used. But you can be the judge of that. I'm just guessing right now. It feels like it was closer last time. So there's some things you probably won't be able to guess about or ask questions about. Kyle asks, aside from blurring the eyes, using peripheral vision and glancing versus staring, are there any other ways of seeing that are of great importance to you during this process? Any other ways of seeing? Well, one thing I could mention just that comes into my head is the idea of popping your eyes, keeping your eyes big. And another thing, so that's just like the great discussion. I love to quote my friend Gary Hoffman. Gary, if there's any chance you're listening to this, I hope I can amuse you. But he walked up to me one day and he says, "You know how you can tell the guy's an impressionist?" And he's just popping his big eyes at me. And but the popping of the eye, keeping your color alive, just keep your eyes wide open. Blurring down will always have an effect on your color, so don't do it for that. There was another thought that I had. I'll keep that in mind to try to remember about use of the eyes. Of course, the primary one is be able to have the skill to see both things at once. Don't feel like you have to look back and forth between two colors. You should be able to modulate your mind in such a way. Remember, you can take in the whole room, and if you take it in such a way that you're not focusing, it'll have what I call a simultaneity of focus. And if you can do that, it'll be easy for you to see two notes simultaneously without flashing your eye back and forth. I should probably say not flashing back and forth much, but you can rather not flash your eye back and forth and make conversation with yourself about what you see when you're not doing that. So that's a different use of the eye, to try to get that screen flat and to try to take in the whole with a simultaneity of focus. I say that meaning there really isn't, everything's in focus, but it's not focused in the same sense as zooming in. So that's another thought. If I think of other things, I'll mention, of course, as we go along here. So I appreciate the question. Yeah, let me think if there's anything else. I'm looking at what I'm doing up there, thinking if there's something I could say about this. That looking and seeing more than once, think of it not just as color, but when you're looking at the curve on one side of the basket, are you aware of the curve on the other side? So that way of thinking, get yourself to be able to see things. So I'm using my mind, though. This is more about the mind, but if you can see multiples, like remember I talked about Michelangelo articulating a hip and then talking about how it picked up the inside on a counterpoint sort of ride, like an S curve, the hip, and then picks up the inside run of the calf. There's that counterplay. So that's all about observing and then observing sets. And I'm going to again put it that way, that if you can observe multiples that actually feel good together and wait and wait and wait on them until you can see them as a set and conceptualize it as a set. But that has more to do with the use of your mind than your eyes. But still, I'll keep that in mind. I'll keep working on that, unless you want to throw another question about it at me. Yeah. One thing that came up last week, for last week's video, came from, who was it? And I appreciated your comment back to me. I apologize for that. Thursday's video. Who was it? Which of you was that? But a point I wanted to make was, typically, I quoted Jerry Garcia, I think, who was he, the Grateful Dead or whatever. He said, you not only want to be seen as the best at what you do, you want to be seen as the only person who does what you do. And I rather was amused by that, but it is partly what I'm showing you here is something that you're not going to find very often. And you could say, well, good riddance. I mean, depending on which camp you're in, but it's just amazing to me how much pleasure you get out of painting what you see as you see it. It just happens that I want to set out color notes and have the field before me that I'm going to do all this stuff with, right? Well, the stuff with. So a lot of times color is sort of something you glue on the outside. And so if you can think, you'll think differently when you realize you have notes out there and you have to draw. You have to paint wet into wet. So you have to have the values right to do it. And then this whole idea that you can articulate it the way it looks and get the abstractions, I'm talking about now the arabesque or the ovoid we talked about or the points and angles. You can get those things using the actual visual data. It's such a marvel of freedom. I mean, and so easy for me to say, work it out for yourself. Some of you have commented on how much it's liberated you. It really may surprise you, but I'm pretty convinced it will surprise you. But you do have to let go of the side of the pool. One of my favorite lines. It really is kind of, in a sense, the deep water. So mess with it. Have some fun with that. Was that Nick? Was that you who said that, Nick? In Buffalo, yeah.
You were talking to Nick in the last video.
Okay, so it was it. It was Nick. Catching sets within the hole, yeah. You should be able to do that. That's something, there are ways to do it too, and so allow yourself different ways. Don't always be looking at at nature the same way. Look at different ways, but when you look at your canvas, make sure you look at the canvas the same way as you were looking at nature. If you're blurring your eyes to see the visual order, when you're looking at your canvas, blur your eyes so you can see that that the order is actually is progressing. So if you blur way down, the same thing should show up, and then you open your eyes, the next level of things should show up the same way as in nature. So when you are going to the canvas, make sure you're using your eyes in the same way. That's a good point, yeah. Yeah. I'm looking back up there, see if this is like, in a funny way, I always thought of this way of painting as being very organic, and yet I can see watching a demonstration has to be a little bit like watching grass grow, which I guess that's as organic as it gets. Maybe I should do this in future with a slightly speeded up, although it would give you the wrong idea about what I'm doing. In some ways it wouldn't, because these demonstrations, you always find yourself speaking too long. You're explaining what you're doing sort of every step of the way, which really slows it down. And every day I do a new demonstration. I say, I'm not going to talk this time. But there's some content that goes with this stuff. And I guess what I really should do is just do a full demonstration, just do a full thing, videotaping it. As I have done. Actually, Mr. Producer produced the violinist. And we do need to probably take that one and just have me speak over it and let it flow at its pace. I'm saying we could even conceivably do this faster, but I wouldn't want to fake you out thinking it was happening faster than it was. All right, any other thoughts out there? Keep them coming in. You'll notice in this screen here that the yellows are different from each other, that the oranges are slightly different from each other, the reds, they're different. They're all different. They're all been tuned. One's more cool, one's more warm, one's more rich. This is it's a real work in itself. And when you get to that point where you're trying to bring the yellow of the basket against, or the orange of the umbrella against the yellow of the basket, you're finding new information. And that what happens at that joint now has to be considered with other plates, other joints in what they did together. So when you get down to that little tail on the left side of the painting, how that relates as an effect, as a color and effect, right, as color relations and effect to the other plates, really needs to be watched, looked at carefully, looked at thoughtfully. So sometimes you're just doing these points as in a pragmatic way. I'm doing top and bottom, left and right. But you need to be doing the rest of this all the time because you're also correcting your color. As soon as you bring the values together, something else happens in color that you need to be aware of. Are we okay, Mr. Producer? You look alarmed over there. All right. Yeah, so there's an effort in the grander way of talking about this to close in the canvas, but to articulate the locations and all this preliminary work. What you might also do, I mean, it's up to you to do this, but I've never found it beneficial over time in paint to scratch around. I was trained that way from the beginning, to throw out a bunch of construction lines and that sort of thing in these things. And if you look at videos, maybe David LaFell or some of the other guys that were at the Art Students League when I was there, you might see a little bit of what I'm talking about in some of their demonstration videos. And yeah. One of the things I'm doing now is I'm just eliminating white, but eliminating some white when there's a run-on like that passage you just watched me do there, it's a soft edge. I'm probably not trying to articulate it as much as getting it harmless, and just massing more, just getting more territory covered. This whole thing about making the whites too big, if you like, because you're going to paint wet into wet, and you're going to do your drawing with the darks. These are axiomatic, right? In wet into wet painting, you draw with the darks, and to draw with the darks wet into wet, the whites have to be too big. So you'll find Sargent talking about pushing the whites out. When you have an error, say up in that right side of the basket there, when you have an error up there, you'll push the basket. I say error, by the way. Everything is just trial and error, but it's trial and error into more and more truth, into more and more rightness, relational rightness. But when you find something over there that needs to be moved, you just push the whites out into the darks, much the way I just described it. And then, and Sargent would say a half inch, and then you come back and redraw that area wet into wet. And that each time you do that, it does require you not to get thicker and thicker with the whites, because when you come back to redraw that, it's going to become rigid. You're going to create tremendous ridges at those joints. So you try to avoid that. I think I'm trying here possibly to establish a more complete top. What happens was you can put one edge up there and call it a top, and you're rather in a theoretical world. I mean, it's just one edge, right? And then at some point you want to make that area look more true, so that you'll have more clarity visually. So when you're looking at other parts, that thing will hold its own as a larger area of the impression. And so here I am chatting. I guess you're not seeing me anymore in this video, but here I'm chatting away undoubtedly while I'm down there mixing notes.
Let me know if you need me to just skip ahead or something.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Producer. It isn't clear yet that I need to do that, but can we, at any point, could you fast forward it a tiny bit?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Oh, yeah. Not skip, though.
Oh, I'd have to scrub.
Would you have to skip? You can't just sort of speed it up a little bit?
I'd have to scrub forward a little bit. Do you want me to?
Not yet. Let's see what I'm doing here in this area, but maybe in a second, yeah. We might have to try it.
There's an hour and 17 left, so I think you have plenty of time.
Oh, okay. All right. You mean of the total video that we have?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have, Mr. Producer saying we have an hour and 17 minutes of total more video time. So, yeah. Thank you, Timothy. That's a name I haven't seen before. John Luke Smith. That's a big name. Where's your PSA from? And thank you for your nice comment, too, by the way. All right. Let's see what else I've got here. I think I will have Mr. Producer. Let's see what I'm doing there. Now I'm talking. Why don't you just jump, say, 30 seconds, Mr. Can you do it by a time frame? Can I just say so?
A few minutes, probably a couple minutes.
All right, jump it for a couple minutes. I should be able to catch up verbally with whatever just happened. It might be better than watching paint dry. You know, one of the things I can say to you about this kind of painting is what we do in the start, we do in the middle, and we do in the finish. So I refer to our way of working as a fractals model. And if you follow the idea, the simplistic idea of fractals, that fractals you picture as a great big paisley shape, right? Whatever that thing is, and then the paisley shape is made out of paisleys that go all around. Each one of them is a little paisley, and the individual paisleys are made out of littler paisleys. Well, our whole methodology is to do what we did at the beginning. So this whole search for the big relationships, it just gets reduced down to smaller areas and the big relationships in those smaller areas, and then it goes further and we paint rather area by area according to the back straggler areas. I'll try to bring more clarity to that as we get further into this. I think I'll have an opportunity to. So what I say is we're all over the place at once in the start, and when you go to an area that's going to be the area that you're going to evolve next, if the whole thing is a big, good impression, and what I tend to do is evolve the center of interest next. And I do because I explicitly take an area, and I say now I'm going to take an area and I'm going to work this area, but I'm going to just deal with it in terms of its majors locally. And I'm going to be all over the place at once again. So I'm just saying that's a fractals mentality. You can go to smaller and smaller areas. You wind up painting a little section of something that at that point winds up being the details around an ear. You'll do the same thing there. Let's see what I'm up to here, if there's anything interesting happening. I guess we're still waiting for something good to happen here. The conversation that goes with this, and there's frequently I'm answering questions with these pauses. So there's this conversation here. Go ahead and jump at me another minute or two if you like, Mr. Producer. Let's just get ahead of ourselves. Pastel says, oh yeah. I'm here for a live, partially human. You're here for a live stream, but it's not a live demo. I could say, would that it were. I think this is briefly mentioned in the ovoid video, but could you clarify why the vertical, this is Kyle again, while the vertical is used for establishing relational angles in proportion rather than a horizontal line? Yeah, I didn't really clarify it as much as you can be faked out more easily. You can think you have a horizontal and not have one. But you see, that would apply more to someone like myself who's working visually. What I mean to say visually, I mean to say that I'm working with just my eyes and not holding up straight edges and levels and all those sorts of things. But vertical, and you could say the same thing about horizontals. Vertical is always sitting. If you have a canvas and you're painting side by side, say this is your canvas and you're painting me side by side, this vertical edge, you'll line this up and make this a vertical. It'll be a vertical all the time. So vertical is like a gift for you. It's sitting right in front of your eyes. You can use it anytime you want as your relationship. But that's the reason. But also, I don't really want to do it with two angles, and you can explore that more if you like. But I've never found a need to go past just using vertical. Sort of, that's what I call the God of all angles, right? It's the vertical. So when you see people talking about they'll tell you about using a device, an o'clock device. I forget what they call it. There's a name that other people who use this use. But it's like you use the vertical and then use 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And to get the angle to vertical relationship that you're talking about. And I just do it with my eyes because I want to be always in my eyes. So you could, but to whatever extent you want to, feel free to check those things with any of the device you can find. I just find that personally I get faked out by horizontal way more easily than I do vertical. And maybe, I don't know, I don't honestly know why that is. Hey, Guy, there you are. There's some of you guys' names I haven't seen before. It's nice. I'm very pleased to see that. Melbourne, hope you guys are doing okay down there. You've had some tough times lately. Kyle says, I think this was briefly mentioned. Yeah, so that's where we were. So there's another Wit. Is there an H in that name, Wit? All right, so let's see where I am on the video here. It's funny how the videos make the contrast funny, make the edges extra sharp and things like that. I don't even know my brushes can make edges that sharp, but I guess they're relationally that sharp. You'll notice if I give you this opportunity to I was just flecking around at the bottom and then I was up to the top. If you look at that top edge I'm pointing at there, or the edge down the right side there, and compare it with the effect and edge down on the bottom right, you'll see very, very clearly that there's a huge difference in contrast between those two areas, right? And that's how huge this is. The edges may be exactly the same. When you're doing this kind of stuff, you've got to be comparing the value-contrast relationship. You've got to be comparing the literal values of the lights to each other. Then the value relationships. I'm sorry, I'm going to Mr. Producer as if I was talking to him. But you have to be comparing value to value, then contrast set to contrast set. So contrast to contrast, right? And then edge is its own set. So make sure you understand that these aren't just one or the other, they are all of them. So if you're not looking, if you start focusing on these edges, you won't understand them. But if you're looking on this unified field I talk about, the simultaneity of focus, if you're looking at everything that way, you'll be able to see which elements are in the same square-edged set. They can be low contrast and sharp-edged. And so if you to really have your value contrast looking right, you're going to want your contrast to be there with the edge, okay? So compare edges, accept that. You need to see the open eyes, big field, and get these edge relationships right, because the world we're painting is a world that's literally right there in front of you if you're using simultaneity of vision, of focus rather. So, more your disposition, I like that. I'm from London, yeah. Have you met Ali Mom over there? Look him up if you haven't met him. He formerly worked with me, and we've had a great relationship over the years. Let's see. Yeah, so here's Kyle. Perhaps because the eyes are arranged horizontally when taking in the image from two different spots horizontally, it's a less reliable way to see. Yeah, that's one, I can't tell you I've sorted it out. I just eliminated it because it wasn't getting me what I wanted for benefit. But you might be able to work your way past all these different things. I still don't want to rely on a measured horizontal, like with a ruler up or something like that, because one of the things about a ruler, you can be holding it horizontal as day as long, but if it's rotated a little bit by accident, it'll be and then now the whole thing changes, so you'd have to be very watchful that you're not doing that. The nice thing about, if you're looking at your straight edge here and your board is vertical to your eyes, perpendicular to your eyes, this vertical should always remain about the same and should look true to any vertical, like a corner of a room and that sort of thing. Yeah, I still don't know that I can prove anything by it's just that I don't use it, so I don't want to say you never, okay, about using the horizontals. Ali, when he first called me to study with me, I thought he was of Arab descent. I thought he was saying it was Ali, A-L-I, and Man I thought was M-A-N-N, or M-A-H-A-N or something or other. But it's M-A-U-G-H-A-N, and his name is O-L-L-Y. Oliver Mon, rather. All right, so let's see where we are in this thing. And one thing I can mention to you, you see the middle of the basket there, there's a sense of form just a little bit. Now, I'm not trying to make it formy as much as I'm making a soft edge, and it will have that illusion a little bit. But it leads me to suggest to you that when there is form going on out there, and I'm painting an area, and my initial thing is to paint a flat note. But the second it doesn't work flat, that's going to be a values issue. So it begins to be a round, then I actually allow for a gradation to be sitting there alongside so the color will be color, but there'll be a movement of value. And if that also suggests a movement of color, I make sure I build that in. One of the things I want at the end of a start is I want a sense of form, the key forms, to relate to each other. And I say that meaning I'm not trying to get form as much as I'm noticing when they don't appear, the general impression isn't the same. So you have to pay attention to value gradations like the one inside the basket there. And so frequently that will suggest a sense of form, a values gradation. It doesn't necessarily mean it is form, it can just be values gradation on a flat surface. But I'm trying to make those things appear. So this isn't just a flat cutout that I eventually will do middle tones, add middle tones into. But the general impression of the edges of value units, let me go through this once. The value units every value unit has a sharper side and a less reading side, right? So one that comes to your eye more quickly than the other one. Virtually every value unit has that. So it wouldn't matter what you looked at out there, to the extent that it's a unit of value, you can find that. And that helps you with the visual order, helps you to know which one rather to paint first and which one is going to be more strongly relating to other guys outside the unit, the object you're painting, or even the value unit you're painting. So have in mind that every value, something very useful to know, that every dark, for example, is going to have a turning side and a cutting side, or a popping side, relatively speaking. Sometimes it's very subtle, understated. Ali, M-A-U-G-H-A-N, Ali Mon. I'm hoping he's listening. Ali, punch your name in there. Yeah. All right, let's see what else we have going on here. Go ahead and punch me another minute or so onto that, Mr. Producer. You can see what I'm doing down there in that little corner. I'm trying to actually knock off that sharp edge down there. And as you can see in the video on the right, and the image on the right, you can see what that might mean. Okay. Is that a message? 1945 is a message to me? My screen is showing a word 1945, 19.45. Is there? Oh, it went away. Does that tell us how far we're into this?
Maybe touch something, I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. But you can see what I'm doing is I'm evolving that right side better, and it's to help me produce the bottom. So the bottom is made out of the dangling tail on the left, but it's much more effectively made out of the data on the right. Now, if you put a unit in there, a value unit, and it's really seriously wrong in some way, it'll have a bad effect on things. You can't really leave the territory with strong things that are with things that are particularly falsely stated, because everything that's on there is affecting your field of vision. So once you put something down, you have to do enough work with it to make it, to bring it, to make it do what its job is, to do what it's doing in nature. And that's probably what I'm doing down there. I'm trying to figure out that, getting enough of that data so it presents better as that corner visually, but also serves as, in combination with that tail on the left side, as a better base. So there's the top up there, and now we're at the base and going back and forth. Now I'm trying to pull together, see the red flower on the right side, I'm trying to literally just pull that sort of into the darks, out of the darks, setting a fresh red note there, and then trying to, and I'm just trying to engage the center of the thing out of that spot, to push my way into the center. Now, typically I don't do this, and I can't honestly tell you why. Usually I would have jumped in by now into the middle red part, just set it up there for a look. And I don't know if there's something that got sidetracked in my imagination. I don't usually creep up on it that much. Because, for example, when you're doing a head, let's take that area there, the basket, and the head is there, and the whole egg is there, and the general impression is there. I just simply go into the darkest part of the eye, for example, and I just blot that note right in there. And then we build from that note, but I block that darkest dark in there. Thank you, Mr. Producer. So I block that darkest dark in there, and then I try to incorporate it, right? But sometimes I do it another way, right? So it depends on what other needs I have. So this might be somewhat a placement problem. I wanted to find out for sure. I see myself jumping down to the bottom here. I might be trying to establish certain other points along this great mass that I'm treating as a light right now. So it's just remember, this thing is a compositional problem as much as it's anything. It's a placement on the page problem, and whatever is going to set you up best. I suggest the use, for example, you have a great top and bottom, that the next thing I'm thinking about frequently is where's the great subdivision? And that basket would form that. Of course, on the other hand, so would the flower have formed a great subdivision. But that's a temperament I've referred to before as the Wyatt Earp mentality. He said, why would I shoot? He talks about, somebody was asking him about having gunfights in the middle of the street, and he said, why would I do that? I might get killed. He says, if I can possibly get this bad guy, by sneaking up behind him, I'm going to do that. Well, there's a similar sort of lack of carelessness. You don't always have to do the frontal attack, much as Degas says, do the frontal attack. But you have to know when to do it, and you have to be ready to do a frontal attack when you need to. And sometimes there are much greater efficiencies in going straight after, for example, that dark red spot up there in the middle. So beats me sometimes why to know whether, sometimes I sense that I'm feeling more tentative, and I don't, so who knows, but I recommend that you know yourself and explore it both ways, and find which way, because you don't want to just be living in a tentative, fearful state. Find out which way will work best for you in a given situation. Whether it's the sneaking up behind the bad guy, or whether it's standing right in front of him and firing, so to speak. You guys who weren't out from the western part of the U.S., that's showing you my background. All right. So let's see. So now you see me. I'm articulating what would be the top edge of that pottery on the left, and again, that's where you see me really trying to hit the note, and I'm trying to hit the note in particular that very top part of that edge. But I have also, by the end of this area, I have to make sure I get the corner. So you go around the top, and you're going to turn a little corner. We're not trying to paint a basket. We're trying to paint a point. Points and angles idea, right? So you're going around that corner, you're trying to get the effect. And now, you see, once you've done that, you can start comparing effect to effect. You can start comparing the effect of that thing hitting the hat to the effect in the upper right of the basket hitting the background up there, right? So it's effect to effect. And of course, if you have two strong effects, you compare your strongest effects. That's a place where you'd love to see the flower in the middle as well, because it's an effect relationship. So that effect is going to be related to the dangling tail on the left. So because those are similar kinds of effects, highlights, relatively dark, drawn with relatively dark silhouetting areas that are silhouetting them. And so my norm is not to paint to pot. Don't get into the pot. That's too much stuff. You won't be able to cover your canvas. What you want is, at the end of the day, is to have your canvas covered in all the places you put down to be well established, all the color notes you put down to be well established, not the objects. The objects is very secondary. You will find once in a while a few things that you have to also do before you leave. Having done that, for example, you've masked in a dark area that has a light fleck right in the middle of it. The light fleck may not be a big deal at the beginning, but it may be something you want to actually pull the paint away from instead of clean white under it sometimes. Not every time. So, yeah. And so this is that area where you see you have that dark there. And now I'm talking about the darks in the neighborhood. So you jump across that dark red, and you can see better the value of the dark shadow over there on the right. And so you're painting that relationship between those two values. And then, of course, once you have that note, the one on the right, and this always applies. This is Paxton talking now. You look around to see where else you might see that note in the painting. You follow? And so if you see it somewhere in the upper basket, any place you see it again, you'll set it there and see if it's actually true. Your eyes can get faked out, so it may not even be there. But if you think it's there, the same illusion that made it there should be happening in the context, should create that same illusion in your painting as happens in nature. So you can see the dark that's sitting there. Now you see, by the way, that's my intro. That's where I was talking about starting to show the form. Now this is not, I'm trying to paint a form per se, but the fact is that hat, portion of that hat can't be painted without a forminess. It won't look right. It won't set in the area right. So that dark right above the right side of that shadow there has to be dark enough. Then there's a middle tone, and then you get to the light side of the hat. As you're going around, it's getting lighter, right? So that gives you there again. There's immediately that sense of form. That may be also one of the strongest or one of the greatest. Sometimes the strongest forms aren't the biggest ones, but I'm interested in the great forms and the great areas of flatness. I'm interested in big, right? Not great in any significant way, but by size, they're great. So that's what's going on there. I'm actually moving. And now I can show you there that my brush marks are going rather vertically. So this is a conversation. So when the form is going, as it is with the hat, going this way, your brush strokes are moving like this, because you don't want to be dragging darks into lights and then going back and forth again, dragging lights into darks. You want the brush strokes to be gradually getting lighter as you move through there. Now I'm doing this in a cursory way, in a more or less a dragging the note kind of a way, and as soon as the color is funny, I go right straight back into that new note. I go back in there and set the fresh color in there and move from there, right? So I'm still not doing simple drawing without the color. I always have to, but the form is the values, right? If the values aren't working as form, if they don't produce the form, then you haven't got the first step of color. Values is the first part of color, right? And then it's the red, yellow, blue, and the chroma, right? Or rather, I should say, I always try to say the chroma first and then red, yellow, blue. It's easier to see the color if you have the intensity. You follow me? So let's see where else you have me going here. One of the things that came up in a conversation, I better look at your questions, I haven't done that in a while. Emily Leeson, are you related to the Leeson, the Max Meldrum? I think that's a misspelling, isn't it? Or it'd be a different spelling. Question, are you washing brushes or keeping colors clean with more brushes? Yeah, I just use 3 brushes, typically, maybe 4, sometimes 5. But I just keep ragging them out. Yeah, I don't dip them in. I hate turpentine, so I never dip them in terps. And I don't dip in anything. If I had a really tragic thing and I was trying to hang on, or if I had only 3 brushes and I needed 4, I might dip one in oils and clean it out. I might dip it several times into oil. But I don't like terps in my paint at all at any point, actually. I don't use terps at all. So that would be me. But I do rag it out. So it's a dark brush, a middle tone brush, a light brush. I want to rag it out and get that fresh new color that I want to use, not being interfered with by the colors below it. For the same reason, by the way, when I set my palette, I lay the white down. I pre-mix it to a nice viscosity, so it's going to be very painterly like the rest of the paints. And then I lay it down in a stream, right? I just lay it down in a long stream, and I make sure I can pick off a fresh piece all the time. If it's in a little puddle, you'll tend to stuff your brush right in it, and then you'll have a hard time finding a clean spot to get a nice fresh note of, say it was a blue spot, now you have a fresh orangey note, and you're trying to get it with a blue in your whites. It'll be hard to do. But that's a good question, yeah. I used to actually have like 8 and 10 brushes stuck between my fingers. It was such a mess. There are things like that. Sometimes you just look at yourself and say, that looks pretty stupid. You really have to be doing that? But what really changed it for me was when I said, Paul, every area has red, yellow, and blue in it. What do you care? You don't need a fresh brush just because it's a red. Now, there are times when you do, or you really, really need to clean it out. But every area, you have to go through the drill of testing whether it should be more red, more yellow, more blue, just to make sure that note's good, right? So if you follow what I'm doing there, then the fear goes away of whether the color in your brush is, if you have, say, a red in your brush, you clean it out pretty good. You're going to go down there and mix your blue, and you'll set it up there, this fresh blue, and if it has some red in it, so be it. You'll never find it causes a problem. And you're always, if you're thinking with me, you're thinking red, yellow, and blue. And I found that simply for adjusting a note, you have to be saying red, yellow, and blue. Should it be, ask yourself, in relation to X, Y, Z, should it be more red, more yellow, more blue? In relation to blah, 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 should it be more red, more yellow, more blue, no matter which color you go to? And then should it be more chromatic or less chromatic? But that's a different question. But you have to ask whether it should be more red. And then you ask whether it should be more yellow if you have a blue, all right? And it's just pretty much consistent that way. And enjoy yourself, because you'll find yourself able to maneuver your way through a color and really get yourself to the beautiful note and the beautiful song of the notes, right? The beautiful interplay of all these notes will be yours to have. But that was a question about brushes, and I started wandering. Let's see what I've done up there. It might be useful to you. You can see I haven't done anything except sort of lost the piece I'm working on now. I've sort of let it just tail off into the background. I'm just trying to sort of get it out of the way. It's also part of me closing out the paint, getting all the paint canvas covered. So who knows? Oh, I'm actually showing you that such and such May plum. I'm actually trying to show which 2 points I'm talking about. But so the left edge of the basket and its relationship to some aspect, some part of that note down below, I was trying to show that there's some near plum relationship. Remember, that's the great angle, the easy one. If you have things that are plumb in your painting, a thing lining up directly, linearly, if you're taking a plumb in nature and you see that that's so, and you should always do it without measuring the plumb first. But you should always check it with the plumb if you have something that's absolute and see that, make sure you're not just faking yourself out. But if there are things that are plums, just make sure you're not missing them. Like if you have something that lands at exactly half or something like that. I mean, don't be missing that kind of stuff. But don't do it by measurement. Do it with your eyes. Get the joy out of finding this with yourself, and you're going to get such confidence. Yeah, and so you see, I eventually do rather knock that off in a way that rather suggests what's happening there. Yeah. But you see what I'm doing is I'm establishing areas. Now, you may say I'm doing an object, but I actually, if that thing is the wrong size or even the wrong angle, it's going to affect a lot of things. The minute you start closing in, things turn into objects. And then they have to be the right size and the right angle. You could say they turn into ovoids. I don't mind us using that other word. But they turn into what I used to call boxes, just a length to a width that forms a two-dimensional phenomenon. I do like the ovoid one because it implies an irregularity that's good. Anytime it could be a diamond, a triangle, or anything, but it just has a two-dimensionality that has in it, of course, inevitably proportions, but it also has, once it becomes not a round, and it's an ovoid, it also has a tilt, and you're also trying to, that tilt you want to get to feel right to vertical. If you look at vertical again, you look at the edge of your canvas while you're aware of something in nature, you'll see how they play together. And that's what you're trying to get a concept of in your mind and get that to happen on your canvas, okay? That's the entertainment of the eyes, that's really the pleasure, half of the fun of this thing. It's amazing what your intelligence and what your eyes can deliver for you. But can you see how this is a spot game, a point of effects, and the interplay of points of effect, and then the rest of it is the movement of color, and you might say the busyness of areas and things like that, but the larger treatment. But there's a simultaneity of what I call the rollers and the joints. I stole that from David. He's talking about knee joints and elbows and the big muscle that lands in between. And those are the joints and rollers. He's teaching his anatomy lesson. And I rather was amused. I thought that was funny in the way he drew, but it was actually obviously clearly a way to paint figures out of your head, draw figures out of your head quickly. And I thought that's fine, but I actually got more kick out of it when I was painting away and saying, oh, we have joints and rollers too. And so it became points of effect and the great washes, as it were, if you're a watercolorist, the great sweeping unities, and then so you're back to the other one. So it's this, I always say that there's these great fluid washes and what they organize around, which is points of effect. So a lot of what you're seeing me try to do here is to establish those two things. The points are all are setting up the entire abstraction that certain the construction people, like your background, Nick. I do. Hey, Aaron, I do clean my brushes at the end of the day with terps. I admit it, but I let them. Then I wash them in soap and then I let them dry. Okay, I do get the terps out of there. In an emergency, I still might, but it's a rare day that I ever use terps. And you don't need 1,000 brushes to do this, so you'll wear out brushes faster if you don't have a good number of each size you have. But by the way, I should tell you that mostly, and I probably said at the beginning, that mostly what I'm painting with is rounds. And I want to thank Dominic in Chicago for the opportunity to buy his set of Gainsborough rounds. He had a vintage set, and they really worked out nicely. Stuff he had collected over years that he wasn't using, and so it was really nice to have that opportunity. But the Gainsborough rounds, a number of my students are now swearing by them. I don't know that they've gone to buying the new ones because these were oldies. You're welcome, Emily. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Is this subject illuminated with natural light? I frequently hit a problem with drastically changing light, especially outdoors. The light on the scene changes, the light on the canvas changes. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Sometimes in demonstrations you aren't left with the opportunity, but in my own personal teaching studio, I make sure that we're painting on the same day. So the same lighting and the same time of day and the same side of the room, and we're not just shifting around doing willy-nilly stuff. Yeah, you do want it to be as near to a controlled light as possible. You have to have a certain amount of flexibility, and I will say that this way, that somebody, I think it was maybe David Johnson, and David comments nicely in lots of the videos, and he talked recently in one about this accuracy thing. And people get the wrong idea about paintings. The idea of accuracy, I think, was Gamble and his verisimilitude versus truth in painting. But we're not looking for absolute truth, or in one sense, absolute accuracy. We're looking for solid accuracy. But it isn't the point, and so you're not going to choke yourself off for not getting that. But what you're going to find, no matter how good you are at measuring all this other stuff, you're never going to be precisely accurate. This is the human eye working. Even a photograph does distortion. Even if you trace the photograph, you're distorting nature. So, and I don't care what the photograph, what the lens was like, you're not going to be giving us what the eye gives us. So just remember that there's a forgivable zone, right? What I call the adequate zone. But there's a level of truth that you have to reach actually to be plausible, to actually be acceptable to the average person in the public. I frequently say that it's like a person writing a book. If the plot or the characters or whatever, the descriptions aren't plausible, you lose your audience. And we have to reach that level. And as impressionists, of course, everybody's been looking at nature their whole lives, so you obviously do have something in people's minds already that you have to compete against. The light doesn't say. I will tell you this though, that when we did if you've seen the time lapse of the violinist, we had a camera for 2 weeks, 13 days, I think it was actually, and we probably had a setup day or something, and I had to paint every day just to get all the work done. It takes me typically close to 40 hours to execute a picture. And so we had to paint through other kinds of days. It's just on those days you don't get to change the color notes. And you want to be a full-blown impressionist at all times, meaning you're willing to change the color 1 minute and the drawing the next, an angle 1 second, and the chromaticity of something, the intensity of something the next. Because the backstraggler often isn't just a drawing problem. I mean, you don't just settle in a linear way, shall we say. Now we do drawing. First we did color. Now we do drawing. We don't actually work that way. We're all over the place at once. We're also all the time doing design. You're always working on understanding the design of your setup better through the lens of a two-dimensional canvas, so to speak. Through the once you get it on the rectangle, you can see much better what the composition really is than when you're looking at nature. So there's a bunch of things that go on like that, and I don't want to get into that now. I better not. Cleaning brushes without terps. All right, let's see how we've done. Okay, so you see me, I'm back into that encroaching thing. I've finally come up there to hit that red note. And that's what I try to recommend that we do. We jump. But you remember, I'm trying not to paint the whole flower. I'm trying to get the top edge of it. And that's one of the liberating things. You paint your darks a little bit small. And when you go up there to hit the first thing you're trying to do is put it in roughly the right place. And then you're trying to find out something that's specific. You want to get the edge, the contrast right, so you're still in the color effect, and then you're in the placement world, right? And each one of those is going to take its own body of time. That's where you don't go up there and just paint a flower. You have to separate this bundle of sticks. And so this first thing is, what's the value of the color note? What's the note look like, right? And then you adjust it to the other notes in the area. Then you have this issue of where it is, and then you have the issue of what the effect is, and then precisely where that is, right? Now you can see me hunting there for a point. You can see the little tail off right side petal. I'm hunting for a point that I might use as something very specific to draw point angle with, right? And you'll see that the more specific these points are, the more useful they are to get angles. If you do a generalized fuzzy thing, you're going to get some generalized fuzzy angle. But the specificity that's in that point makes greater specificity in getting an angle relationship to something, to say to the pot down below on the left side, or anything else that happens to be a point reader, right? A reader, I use the word reader, it just means the area of contrast. When you produce an edge with a contrast, I can't see that from here. We have a few seconds. Yeah, all right. So we're at a point now where I'm told to go to break. So why don't we have my Mr. Producer pause this like immediately. You guys get a 5-minute break. I can need a drink, and we'll come right back, and just as soon as we can. All right. Try to drop. Oh, okay. Mr. Producer says it's gone back to the beginning. I don't see my image on there yet, Mr. Producer. Am I on? There we are. Okay. Mr. Producer's had to go all the way back to it. The whole thing on its own went back to the beginning. The demonstration video did. So, hang with us for a second. Let's see if you guys have other comments here. Yeah, Canvas Engineer, nice to see you there. I'm glad you're on. Hey, remind us what part of the world you're from, and anybody else, by the way. I'm just interested. This is wonderful to have England and Australia and who did I leave out? It'd be nice if you guys don't mind mentioning just where you're from. It might be kind of cool for other people to know that. If even when they see you under my in the comments area, it's pretty cool to know those things. Prod by Ghost. I don't know that I've seen you. How dare I what?
I can actually turn up the speed, but I don't think you want to.
No, I don't want to anymore. No. Yeah.
Going back to the beginning again. Hang on.
We're having trouble getting the canvas. The demonstration. Mr. Producer does not have his usual advantages today with his computer failing him. The big one. We'll be with you in just a second. Partially Human is from Texas. Jim is from England. Hi, Jim. Yeah. Anybody else? Keep coming in. Give us 2 minutes of something to chat about. 1 a.m. there. Yeah. I know. It's less of a difference than I thought. Is that just 4 hour difference? It's what is it now? About 8 here. 5 hours. 5 hour difference. Yeah. Canada. Proud by Ghost. Hi, Canada. Wow. That isn't a typical Canadian name. Solomaya Natovska. What a name. That's good. That's a great name. Too bad we can't hear pronunciations on here. I do mean, by the way, I shouldn't say this right now. I do mean to have a conversation, bring maybe Tom Dunley and myself here, and have you guys be live with us. And do the same thing, but have us answer questions about the GAML world. If anybody thinks that's interesting, we just had an event at the Guild in which we sat there and answered questions about what the GAML experience was like, and what kinds of things he was teaching, learning, experience in various ways, personality and stuff. But if that'd be of any interest to you, I'll do a live stream covering that. And I mentioned it last time, but I'd be happy to do it again. I think we're back. Mr. Producer, looks like we're back on Jesse, Nova Scotia. Yeah, yep. I like this is all you guys. These are no new names to me in the Canada side, but I have a bunches of other guys I've met from the Canadian side since starting this. Nice to know you guys. I remember when I was actually in high school in Canada for 1 year, and when I was a kid, in Denver, I was up in the area of Calgary at a boarding high school, I remember they had on the walls at that high school, they had all these Canadian painters, big block color stuff, very powerful, very strong. And it looked like these guys were probably out there in really, really cold weather. A lot of them with snow pictures, and they were using big brushes and like, let me get out of here before I freeze to death or something. But a very distinctive style. Not all the same either, I didn't mean to say that, but there's a certain character to it. And I guess people say the same thing about us and the Americans versus the Brits and stuff like that, versus Europeans in general. I better start talking about this thing. It looks like, you see what I'm doing now? I'm cleaning up the mess around that projected possible, center of interest there. I'll come back to your points here. That's Ukrainian name. Wow, yes. First time catching a live stream. I've been watching a lot of your videos now since finding your channel about 2 weeks ago. Good stuff. Okay, yeah. Any questions at this moment? Go for it. Anything on this, what I'm doing right now? Whit, thanks for that. Any other comments about what I proposed? Yeah, bring it. So you can probably see what I'm doing here. I'm bringing, now the area, we have an idea called flat shadows, okay? What it means, basically, the idea of a flat shadow, it means that there's no value variation in the shadow. And that's an original concept. I say it's a concept that, well, you could say it originates with Leonardo. He talks about clear and obscure. He doesn't exactly say shadows are flat, but you'll find, and I talked about it, if you go to the video talking about atmosphere, I talk quite significantly about flat shadows there. So what you'll see me working on here, if you look up the basket, that whole area of dark up there is a flat shadow. And I might be generalizing a big movement because I haven't expressed the shadow line yet, the line of shadow. which Gamble called the bedbug line. So that is one of those things, though, when you get into an area like that, it's significant that you know where the direct light stops and the penumbra or the gradations out of that, where there's a wider light or secondary light, begins, because that's when it begins to be formy. So the thing is, the shadows are flat, they're for atmosphere. The form is in the lights. It's a discussion that you have in the background that Gamble brought to us. So there is that search. But some of these notes on the videos, some of these things are different enough that you can't exactly tell what's going on in those. So I don't know. I won't say more about that. Queensland. There we go. Miles and miles away. Michael Jones. I had a student named Michael Jones once. Wasn't you. Okay, but I always find it hard to know what the focus of interest is. Any advice? Yeah, I don't think of it as much as the focus of interest as much as the area of greatest interest. So focus, I'm not sure is the word I would use, but you will, if you don't look hard at the painting, if you just come casually swinging by, there'll be one part of any organized painting that's going to hold your eye more than another part. It may not be by much, but there will be that. And it's typically high contrast. I mean, I believe it was Corot who said it was the lightest spot in the painting. And if you have a middle to dark value painting, of course it is. Your eye's going to go right to that lit spot. But you can put it in that category if you want. But I wonder if you don't say it differently. So the area of greatest interest in this painting, it's probably, and by the way, if you make it a spot, a dot, but it might be a larger area. Like it might be inclusive of certain parts of the hat and the top of that flower there. That might be your area of greatest interest. It probably is, right? But it doesn't mean you don't have interest. Down there where the pot is silhouetting against the hat, that's an area of interest. And by the way, I'm just showing you there the height to width stuff. Every time you paint a new spot, you have a new set of heights to width. You have a new set of ovoids to deal with. New set of boxes with the height boxes. And each of those boxes potentially has a tilt to it, so it pays to really work on that. I don't know what I was doing when I was pointing top and bottom and then going to the sides, but it's probably showing students that you have to get these proportions right. And it's not just the left to the right or the top, it's all of them. Any spot creates a whole new dynamic, a whole new set of ovoids, of units of shape that have their proportion and their gesture as the dominant thing you have to get right initially. And I just happen to be painting with the look of nature as much as I can at these spots. So when I paint that little side of the flower, I'm trying to make a point up there that I'm going to use. Not all the points, not everything about the flower. I don't want really much to turn into a flower as much as I want to hold a point that I can then use and deal then with all those new ovoids, those new proportions and gestures and stuff. All right. Let's see where I am. Oh, so you told me to make that raggedy gray thing coming out of the red. Well, that's me seeing that other note down there in the hat. You see that value goes right out of the flowers and right into the hat. So that's just me just throwing some of that color at that area just to get that started in my mind a little bit, right? Now on the left side there, you can see I've already made a sort of a busy area. Now if you look just to the left of the red flower, that area presents texturally is busy. It's light, dark, and so I just think of that as a busy field, right? And so I don't try to paint every one of those flowers. I just simply try to create that sense of busyness, knowing I don't have the time in this day to work out all the details of how that's going to work, and also knowing that I can render any aspects of those things as time goes by, meaning that at once it's dry even. Our great concerns about not letting it dry is, the only time we care about it staying wet is when we don't have the major players well situated. It's a huge piece of this thing is to make sure these PowerPoints are really well established so you're not moving them again after that. But it requires you to do a lot of filling around the area so you can see the general impression of whether it's true. And then you check it out at the end of the day. You may not have the perfect, shall we say, likeness of the thing, but you have everything that's potentially dangerous is at least in a place where you know that you can correct it further. I'm looking back over at my producer again, that you know you can correct it further by a simple adjustment that isn't going to make you have to try to push a light into a dark. I hope you're following those things. They're following on the streams of what I've already said. But you can see I'm still not painting a basket. And The one thing I would say to you about this entire thing is what we're painting is a field. It's an ensemble. It's a field of color notes. It's a field of value relationships. It's a field of effect relationships. And it's just, that's the thing. We think of it as the ensemble, the general impression. It's the ensemble of all these different elements hanging together. And so at no point are we actually saying, and now I'm painting the basket. That, I used to try to do both, and you can't do both. You really have to stay in one mind, and that's this mind. And that's why I say there's this unique mind that no matter what other things people get that we get, there's this unique mind that says at all times you're a naive I who's just painting color notes in their relationships, right? What they do when they meet and how they relate when they don't, where they're not meeting and all that stuff. So you can see that you can see what I've done so far with all that stuff. Now, I don't know if I'm down there. I might be down there adding this value to the basket because I've set myself up with some other forms, or actually I may be trying to correct my red note up there by getting something better about that, something more comprehensible about the color of the other red, the dark red in the foreground. So that's just a color relationship thing. And again, it's about having so once you have a red, you're always tuning yourself to the other reds. I tell students that what you're really trying to do in painting is you have to reflexively, what you're trying to do reflexively is when I say to you, or you say to yourself, what color is that? Your instinct is supposed to be to look at all the other colors in the field. It's not to be look at that color. You see what I mean? That's reflexive. So everything you do, as soon as you see a red note and you're trying to make it, you're aware of all the other red notes. Or even before you start trying to make it, be aware of the other red notes. You have an idea what its role is in the set, right? Is it the orange? Is it the most orange of the reds, or is it the most purple of the red, the bluer ones? Or is it the most chromatic or not, right? So it lands, though, in a set. And have that in your mind at all times, that every time you're painting a note, you're actually relying on the rest of the set. Now, other sets are the chromal sets. The most highly chromatic notes all relate to each other as our own set. And the darks all relate to each other. You'll see that one of the darks is going to be more green, the other one's going to stand for the red, and the third one's going to stand for, shall we say, the yellow or whatever. But they're going to play roles. They will not all be the same. They may be the same value. So that gets you a way in where you say, oh, at least I've got one of the three sticks of color solved because I've got the value dark. These darks are all the same, but now look, the color relationships are wrong. And one of them is slightly more chromatic than the other two, etc., right? All right. So you see what I'm doing is actually closing in to certain points. Again, this is the subdivision in terms of spatial subdivisions. There are high contrast subdivisions, and there are spatial subdivisions. I mean, in other words, the visual order, there's this top end, all these power things, and then there's this second level where they're not the power things. And then these tertiary levels where they're very, very weak. And you could say Lost is the last in that set of levels in terms of effects. But they're also spatial levels. So what's the great shape? We talk about the great ovoid. And then you can talk about subplots all the way down to that thing that you might even think of as the basket. You can be worried about that gesture and proportions of that abstraction. Okay? So it but if you can just keep out of your mind that you're painting a basket, you're going to be well served. There's no basket. There's just a set of relationships and the things they do together. Leave the word basket off of it. Just feel and enjoy the event, visual, okay? And you're going to be free to be a painter the entire time. You're not going to suddenly become a photographer or a scientist or an encyclopedia. You're just an eyeball. And yeah. So you can see that I'm bringing more data in. I found at that point, I remember specifically that I found at that point that larger color note of that left edge is actually off. So I'm filling it up a little bit, making it a little bit of a bigger note. So I can see it better. Little dinky notes, just if you could put a little dinky note side by side with another note, it's very difficult to see what you got. The more you broaden out the note away from the effect, where the dark meets the light, the bigger you make those notes, the easier it is to see. It's also easier to see the effect. You really focus on the effect, but it's just easier to see each of the colors, one of the colors on either side. So it's good to do that. And then when you cut it down to a thinness, it still has to perform whatever it's supposed to be doing there, but it's just easier to see. I think of myself as a one-edge brush kind of guy, right? And what it means is that the whole time I'm putting in a color note, I'm really thinking, I'm thinking about there's a color mass here, and then there's a joint, right? So the color mass, what's the color note, and then what's the joint doing right at the joint? Can I drag these back? Yeah, I'm not listening to your questions at the moment. I got to get back to this. This is good. Pittsburgh, great, Diane. So what holds my eye? Yeah. So if you look casually at the thing, something should grab your eye more than something else. And you're going to have to walk your way through that, Whit. We can talk about that another time. If you want to, send me an email about that, and I'll try to do a video specifically about that, okay? But if I have time here, I'll also do it here, if I can remember. Cap Tokyo, I like that. Are you Japan, or is that just me reading into things? But you're very welcome. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be opening your eyes to this. It's the most marvelous thing, and all I can do is just try to get you to play, because this whole thing about the naive eye, and it's just the field of colors and what they do, where they meet, it just simplifies the problem, but it directs you way more specifically to the real nature of this form, which is color values. That's the entertainment that we are into. That's our music. So, and it's a different, I don't ever pick on anybody else's illustration and all that sort of stuff. That's a different form. It's just a slightly different art form. It may have a lot of this content in it. I'm not going to ever dispute that it doesn't, and people try to bring all these in. But it's hard to be two people. You really want to focus. If you're doing this kind of stuff, you really care about color music, you probably want to be doing this kind of work. So, yeah. Paul, do you scrape paint back after your session to assist with drying and blending values? I never scrape to blend values. I don't actually want to blend value. I want my color to be broken all the time, but not necessarily values broken. So, because there's a vibrancy to broken color. But if it's a smooth area, it can still have color movements and color richnesses by red, yellow, and blue combinations to produce the field. That's something you're going to have to work out to understand. But no, I don't scrape back except for one reason, and I don't actually usually scrape that, and that is I look around from the side, sort of look sidelong at my painting in good light, and if I have bad ridges, they're going to dry that way. I try to make a point of knocking them down. You can do that with a palette knife. We were encouraged by Gamel to take a palette knife and scrape the ridge off into the darks, so you'd be ready to paint it the next day. Don't ever scrape off the ridge into the lights, okay? That'll be dragging darks into lights. You don't want to do that. But we did. I mean, we were trained that way, yeah. So the answer, but not to blend, okay? So the area that holds my interest is more west, where the green meets the red. I don't know why the flower doesn't interest me. Well, blur your eyes more probably for that, though. Back up a little bit mentally about blur, because it really is a values impact thing that really it makes that driving area. So consider that too. That was to Whit, who's still talking about the center. What holds your eye? So I would suggest to do the part I'm calling the center of interest is when you blur the heck out of your eyes, that part that's still there, way up in your eyes. That part that comes out of the fog the fastest and the most dramatically. And that's a values area. So speaking of color notes, how do you typically decide the value of a color note? For example, in the leaves on the left adjacent to the red cloth, you went with a darker green. Yeah, don't trust that photograph there, though. I wish it was a more accurate one, because even that makes it look like I'm painting a cool picture. And I'm not painting a cool picture. It's considerably warmer than that picture shows it at this moment. So I don't know how else to recommend it, but our emergency kept us from actually working this out better for you this time. So yeah, you'd be right, except you may not be. But it also depends on which part of that green passage you're talking about. You can see I have a lighter green there, and I also have a darker passage down below. So who knows precisely what that might mean. But a good question. But the question was, how do you typically decide the value of a color note? So you put down a color note, you look at it to all the other notes in the field. Now, the two things that give you, so that's the first thing, you compare it to other notes in the field. The second thing you do is you compare it to the notes immediately next to it. The ones it loses its way into, it's the same values as. And when it produces a light effect, it's a different value from those, and that's the other portion that you're trying to get. What's it contrast with? What's it's the same as, right? So it's the similarity and contrast relational thing that we're doing. That's how you ultimately are determining all your values, apart from just looking around and saying, oh, this looks like a middle tone compared to that. But remember, when you set up the painting at the beginning, you're saying, what's my lightest light and what's my darkest dark? And that's your parameters. you're living with those. So this thing, you pick this note and you're looking at your darkest dark lights, and you see what lands at number 7 between 1 and 10, so we say. And that's the note you're going to hit. Now, you don't say numbers like that because I don't find that useful. But you set a note down there and you look at it and see if it's right in the field. Here's the darkest dark, there's the lightest light. Does this look like it lands there in the right place? The same thing with chromas as well. So that's actually a really good question. Oh, good, Whit, thanks. I'm glad you do. Does the yellowish hue of the sun on those leaves come in later after the major notes have been laid down? Does the yellowish hue of the sun on those leaves? Oh, you mean the light? Yeah, this isn't a sunny painting, but yeah. That stuff above it, that thing above those leaves. Yeah. No, that area. That's right. It's such a small thing though. That's one of those things where sometimes you do those things, sometimes you don't. If it's a small enough area, you can just almost indefinitely just leave it alone. The problem is I truly can't just leave it alone. Let's see how I resolve that. But yeah. You do mean the yellowish hue above the greens, yeah, which is, yeah, I mean, what's the deal?
Okay, I can bring a chair.
Oh, yeah, that'd be fine. Oh, yeah. Sorry, guys. One of my students is actually in the building, and he's wondering if he can come in and join us. I'm sure you guys won't mind too much, will you? So we'll have a live audience tonight too.
Bring him in and put him on camera.
Oh no, I can't do that.
No, you can't?
No, I don't want to do that. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. No, if you want to just be here, that's fine though. Question. Well, sorry to be talking sort of away from you, but Mr. Producer was wondering if I wanted to bring him in and have him on camera with me. I don't want to do that. That's very complicated and not appropriate, not for this. So speaking of color notes, do you typically decide the value of the, okay, so. Yeah, and that's one of those things about that yellow note, but the green one is you can put that in any time as long as you have the ability to push the greens. As long as you know in your heart you can push those away. And you don't have to push them away with, what am I going to say? You don't have to rag it out, but you could. So in this phase, this is a beautiful wet phase. This day is that day. So you can bring a light back if you need it. If it doesn't take up a lot of territory, it might be just getting into too many things. And I'm trying to limit myself to the numbers of things I actually am treating as drawing, which is why a lot of things, any subplot things, really have to be left to one side. So, all right. If I could, I would attend your live classes. Yeah, yes, I wish you could. I wish all you guys could come over to my intensive. The thing about it, I took this intensive about 6 weeks. I'm just going to say this because I've been announcing it. June 20th this year. And I do, by the way, break it up. You can take segments of that if they work for you. But I really try to get people who have a little bit of confidence in their drawing and ability to hit a values note and stuff like that. And just try to get you to drop the way you're working and just walk you through this visual impression method of thinking, way of thinking, to try to introduce you to the mindset. And it does take a bit of time for you to do it. And I find myself typically sort of fighting you, or you fighting yourself, because you won't drop certain things because you want a certain kind of success. And this is like naive eye 101. It's color ensemble 101 thinking. So you can see that this isn't pure color fields, though. This is color, and then obviously you can see by where we are right now that we're actually introducing drawing in a major way. Right, exactly what. So forget the function of the items and just flow with the larger image and how it flows and feels and the joy you can get from it. Absolutely. I mean, I'm actually looking for these things to play the games that you see out there, the interplay. Those whites, including that one above the greens, those whites, the hat, in this case here, the hat looks in this lighting on this odd set of objects. You would say about that group over there that hat in the foreground is a certain amount of intensity. The one to the left above the greens is different, and the one in the background is warmer. There's different kinds of warms and cools. There's different kinds of stuff about it. But then once you see a system and you like the way it plays together, that becomes something far more engaging and keeps you focused until you achieve it, right? And that's just true of the inner relationships of all the different colors, as well as the linear ones. Like that curving line in the bottom left there, there's an interplay between that and the hooking left basket line the left basket line, and maybe even aspects of the hat, maybe even the right side of the hat, curve talking to curve talking to curve, and these things are coming in sets. And they're entertaining, and you're looking to produce the entertainment, right? Which elevates you past the accuracy. And on the other hand, they won't do the entertainment if they're not accurate, if they're not well placed, not the right sizes, not the right size curves. They won't deliver the same joy. They won't. So I like the way you say that, the joy you can get from it. Here in Richmond, we currently have an American painters exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts. Lots of great work, Sargent, Whistler, Cassatt, and others. Great. Yeah, one of the things that typically the historians of the American world have. You want to. Mr. Producer, you want to pause that for a second? Or can we? I'm going to just talk for a second about this. But one of the things the historians of the Western world have done is they've left out the Boston School. They've left out most of the great painters. And that's why I tell you to go find. I mean, we have a huge body of really good painters. I'm talking about somebody like Blatchfield, Edwin Blatchfield. Or, you don't leave people like Blatchfield out if you're actually a sane with it historian. You just don't know your stuff. But these guys typically will take Aikens. Would you pause that if you can, Mr. Producer? Oh, it's still working. Oh, it's just a delay? Okay. But they will do that typically, and so that Boston School won't be included, et cetera. So what you want to do is get that book that I've talked about a number of times, Evelyn Jackman, and I think it's just called American Painting, and you'll see this mass, maybe 100 painters, all of whom are pretty impressive. And not the most impressive of which are the expatriates, right? There's just a lot of really good painters in this country. So, and I suspect that would be true of most countries now. Everybody just blips off the top like everybody else is unimportant, and just amazing. To take a great muralist like Blatchfield and you can look at Sargent all day, but the muralists should be considered with muralists, and we have some seriously good muralists. And there's a lot of painters you won't see. You won't see the Matthews from the California world, et cetera. So I recommend that these are all, the curators are all taking who the top players are. And I don't even consider Aikens a top player, and that's just me talking skill. But in any case, yeah, we can start moving again, Mr. Producer. But I thought I should pause and talk about that just for 2 seconds. Oh, good. Yeah, Kyle. Yeah, I know that's true. I remember picking up stuff about brushstrokes. I remember picking that up from certain painters, and you got to see it. There's a thing called touch, and one of the reasons I like a textured canvas that has that. I talk about the 12 single prime canvas of Clausen. I talk about that because when you use a bristle brush on that canvas, you can feel it coming off and touch the quality of the edge you're making. Also, a certain amount of touch, a certain amount of felt. Helps you with that. When you're expressing that kind of an edge, you can feel whether it's the same as the last time you did it. It's a strange thing. That feeling for the mark, right? Touch, tash, yeah. Jeff, boy, Vasquez, that's close to Velasquez. That's pretty cool. It's been incredibly instructive to see the paint stroke. So, yeah. One of the things I haven't mentioned that I'm doing is the light is coming in from the left, so I'm typically trying to correct those notes no matter what I've put down. And by the way, I'm finally putting the flat shadow in there. You see it on the left side? You see me flattening that shadow out, just really getting that thing masked into its value and solidifying it. So whatever I was doing before, there's a lot of things you do that the back straggler may be something that if you have one way of working, you'll always do X and you'll never not get it. And another way of working, you'll be like working from the general impression. You may not always do X. You'll still be working from the general impression, but at some point you'll have to get to the flat shadow, for example, inside the basket. But that's just evidence that these things aren't always done in a 1, 2, 3, first this, then that, and always this, then that, but in all over the place, and then you're over here to be there, and so on. And whatever comes, that's the next thing to address. I was sort of set up to have to address that by talking about that light you just spoke of in the background there above the green. So, so that the stroking, I was going to say that, so that if the light's coming in like this, a certain amount of your weaving, your stroke should always be sort of interesting. It should always be doing something different, but there needs to be a general tendency for them to be going this way. So if there's angling slightly this way, slightly that way, as long as they don't pick up the light by going this way. Because if you pick up the light, you're going to be changing your actual values. The ridges you're creating are going to be changing the general flatness, for example, of an area behind that whitish fuzz back there that you call the sun. No, it's not an artificial light. No, this is natural light. It's not the sun, it's north light. And we're painting in north light, so you don't see the sun in north light, Kyle. Not an artificial light, but I'm not sure you were asking that previous question about when you said, somebody said the sun. So it's not artificial light, no, it's straight light. But Solomon, I'm going to have to start calling you Ukraine so I can say your name. Would it make less sense to try this style of painting with acrylics? Would it make sense? No, the drying time is the problem. Yeah, they dry much faster and less movable on the canvas. I wouldn't recommend it, for that reason. Now, somebody with experience can probably do it with any medium, but I'm a guy who relies on this whole day, the canvas staying wet through the whole 2 hours or 3 hours, whatever the start happens to be. So, lots of the things I'm doing, you wouldn't be able to do that. You have to reinvent areas. As much as I worked even with alkyds, and I have done that, landscapes laid in, when I have a single day to work, I'll sometimes lay in with an alkyd, thinking to get it to dry, and to get an hour's coverage and then get it to dry. And I find that even that's just rather distressing, but it does lend itself to a certain way of mark making, and you might be able to get away with it once you get accustomed to whatever that takes. I just can't give you the answer. I think you'd wind up with having more of a staccato, which a lot of oil painters wind up with too. Marks just put down and left with brevity and more like the mosaic model you hear about, and not trying to do anything that has to do with fused. One of the reasons I like the fused note, and I don't mean scraping and blending, but when values fuse one into the other, there's a music there that's of a very specific kind, and I'm not a big friend of flowing fused notes looking marky. You know what I'm saying? Looking poked at. It's not a thing. It's one of those reasons I rather don't like the Monet, and a lot of the Impressionists tried to use broken color in faces. I mean, because faces don't look broken to me. Now the grass does. Sometimes areas of the clouds and skies do, and that places it's appropriate, but that's one of the reasons, though, that I wouldn't probably use acrylic. But there may be ways. But the other part of it that I can't deal with is the drying at different values. I don't know how you can ever get past that, right? But as I said, even alkyds, they don't change much in color. They're difficult to mess with, to get those kinds of things. All right, so you can see it all closing in rather. And remember, my goal at the end of the day is to have the canvas covered, have the big color relationships largely expressing the beauty of that, and to have the spots where there might be problems into the future, the high contrast places, really well placed. So those points that make triangles, the points that make boxes, getting angles to angles, getting points to points, making it the angles, getting those things right, or anything that rather forms what we call the ovoids, you think if you've been following. Those things I want to have all the major ones really doing good stuff, right? And so the most important thing for you is to really try to stay tuned to that. Are you really bringing everything you put down? Are you really following through and getting the relationships right? That sets up for you to have to do, okay? I'm going to pause for just a bit. I'm going to take a drink here. All right. So here we are. Hope you guys have your bottles next to you. Beautiful weather here in New Hampshire today. Beautiful evening. All right, so let's see if I can see where we are. You can see that I'm heading toward expressing that dark spot right at the top of the hat there. Over here now, you see me on the left side. I'm trying to actually make points. Now, this stuff is very much affecting the composition. I mean, it's helping me locate the composition. So we really do want to stay on top of the things like that make that sharp point right at the edge of the umbrella. That's going to be a thing. It's going to be an important table setter. It's going to set up, on the other hand, a whole new set of proportions. From that point, I'm going to have to deal with that point down to the point on the at the very bottom on that tailed leaf thing. That point as it relates to the flower point or any other points, every one of them can be checked, right? Now, if you find a problem with any of them, it's an indication of a larger problem typically, and it may drag you back to having to address a previous thing that you thought you were pretty right about. The only things you're not going to address are those things you fixed at the beginning, which is the top and bottom, and the top and bottom locations this way. But even those points are negotiable this way, except for one that you've picked already to anchor to. So you're going to pick one point to anchor to this way. And that's something I might have done at the beginning with the flower, in all reality. because it's such a dramatic point, it really holds places two ways. So I might have actually started this painting by setting that, or one of the first effects I made might have easily have been that one. It wouldn't have been a big surprise. But again, some of that depends on what sort of mood you're in. If you feel like you're a strong man and you can just dominate everything, other days you feel like you need to beat around the bush for a few minutes, you'll do that. Yeah. So I'm building into that corner down there, the dark in the background coming down there and forming that point. Interesting, Mr. Producer, that we suddenly shrunk to the little tiny one. In some ways, that's better. No, in some ways, that's kind of cool, isn't it? One of the things that brings to mind, though, what you want to be doing when you're painting is get back a lot. So you'll tend to see the whole. And if you're not busy, you see, when you're up doing little things, when you're up too much, you'll be doing too many little things. You still need to be very specific about the things you're doing, very articulate. Be very articulate, as if you were right on top of it and getting your eye right in there. But the big point is the point, right? So you're just making that an articulate point, so it's useful for the greater point. But the more you're back, having done that, I mean, having said that you're making those good points, the more you're back, the more you're taking in the whole, and you're watching to see if the great beauty is there, because everything you're doing is trying to say, look, there's this beautiful ensemble. Let me play the game. Let me see what it's going to take. Darkest dark over here, the richest red over there, this note, that note, the color scheme's starting to come along, and now we're starting to distribute effects and all these sorts of things. And but it's always the ensemble, it's always the whole. So what did Reynolds say? Genius lies in seeing the thing as a whole, right? So here's a guy that we don't think of as the impressionist, right? He does come post Velázquez. So, yeah. And again, that's a spot, by the way, up there that I could leave for another day. And you'll find yourself, you have spots like that. You might say, you know what, I'm not going to end this thing safely today if I don't just leave off working there, because that's going to take me a few minutes. And you'll know that from experience. And so you'll go back and say, but have I covered all the major stuff? And that's going to take some judgment, the judgment of experience. And I'm not saying that's what I was thinking there, but it's possible I was. Who knows? Again, your satisfaction with this thing is going to be great if you're not trying to make an object. If you're trying to make objects, it's not going to be satisfying. You'll see all sorts of little things that probably should be different. But if you are getting to the point where you're loving the interplay of the great relationships in an ensemble, and frankly, if the great relationships aren't great, I don't think you have a great ensemble, do you? It's a question to think about. So, yeah, let's see if anything else comes to mind here. How are we doing for time, Mr. Producer? Are we okay?
About 8 minutes, and also about 6 minutes left on the video.
Okay, yeah. Did you hear that? We have 8 minutes time total and about 6 minutes left in the video. So I'm going to go right on and see if there's any more questions here. That's great. Okay. RT, hi RT. Do you recognize any parallels between the Boston School, how it articulates itself in reaction to prior art movements and other philosophical, don't come into philosophical movements. I mean, that's an interesting question, though. I don't dispute that. Debussy and others as it relates to, in the Impressionist era, and how they relate to some philosophical movements. But that's not, I don't do that for your sake. I would never be doing that here, probably. But how it articulates itself in reaction to prior movements, one of the things I see happening in the conversations coming out of the Boston School, that these guys were interested in the what was the most significant thing that makes this form what it is. And so they were obviously growing out of the Impressionist model, but they also were educated in the academic training, although more specifically it's the Antwerp type, it's more the Dutch if you're talking about Benson and of course Munich if you're talking about De Camp. But it's more the Dutch, and that's a more painterly approach eventually. And by the time they were being affected by it, Otto Grundmann, as an example, is one of those guys from that era. And that had this dramatic, trickle down into, and I think Manet is affected by it, among others. You guys who are reading this stuff carefully, by the way, everything I do is with my eyes. So, and so I happen to be reading things, but most of my reading is reading paintings and seeing where they feel like they're coming from. But the one thing I see in the thread of the Boston School is that there's a concern with maintaining the thing that makes painting in whole, that special thing. And I don't think they have that sense that it has to be this or that. Gamel's model was a little bit different, and that's another discussion. and you can see in some of his writing, and maybe the Paxton biography. I don't know if I have that available to you, but I'll look. If anybody wants it, you can ask me, but I'm not sure I have it in a PDF form. By the way, I'm looking at this image right here. I'll try to come back to that thought. But you see what I'm doing is I'm actually getting the size of this mass to help me with seeing the size of the basket even. But any mass, like the shadow mass, it has to be dealt with as its own phenomenon and with its own gesture and proportions. Never forget that every line has gesture and proportion. Every line has gesture, minimally, and shape. Even proportions if it has a curve on it, because there's an implied width to it, right? From point to point with the arc, there's actually an implied width. But every value unit has its own gesture and proportions and its own shape. And they all affect all the other ones in the page, in the picture. So the further you get along in here, the more you have to return to all the other areas you put down when you were more ignorant and start making comparisons again. Compare. But yeah, that's my sense from their conversation. And so one of the things I sensed, for example, in the Benson with the three daughters out there in the woods that I show so frequently, is that this guy got what the essential magic is in painting. So I think that's just a mainstream thing. I don't think it was a reaction to the academic. Honestly, don't think it was. And I don't even think Monet was a reaction to that, although his personal life shows some reaction. But I think he was looking for something that he felt was missing, and that is the magic of the world of color, right? And he's like me, a nearsighted guy. I mean, I think nearsighted people are more aware of color by necessity. It's a funny thing, but for example, with a nearsighted person, if you're looking at a Christmas tree, even when you have glasses on, you're looking at a Christmas tree, you won't see 1,000 bulbs, you will see bulb masses, and these colors doing amazing color things. And that's a very unsatisfying thing to see light bulbs instead of that magic of color that you saw. But a lot of the world visual is like that for a nearsighted person. There are other certain kinds of advantages to the nearsighted person too. Does the broken color note sound exactly like Monet? Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it, Kyle? Yeah. So Jeff Vasquez, what do you think of the Zorn's limited palette? Well, you see, it wouldn't satisfy me, right? I tried all those things, by the way. Went to school as an impressionist with 21 colors in the palette. And in the course of experimenting, I used Zorn's palette, and I just couldn't. What I found is the life in the light, the levels of chroma and all that stuff, and then the run of the colors. I mean, like this world of the mystery of the music of color, to me, can't be had. You can get some subtle level of it, but it's like taking a beautifully played sonata at the symphony and then putting it on a disc or something and then reducing it down to a lesser and lesser thing. Why would I do that? But on the other hand, people do have a kind of a sense that the world of painting ought to be muted. It ought to be quiet. There's more taste in that. I've never found that to be the case. I mean, there is such thing as vulgarity, so to speak, in color too, but that has more to do with putting color side by side that are poor to look at. I mean, men can dress vulgarly. Have colors that are just grotesque side by side. Let's see if I've done anything here that I should look at here before we do it. Let's see. Do we have any more? Yeah. Are you using any oils to thin the paint or have oil on the canvas before painting? Yeah, I do thin the whites at the beginning. That's partially human, yeah. I do thin the whites, as I said at the beginning, I thin them down to a painterly viscosity. That'd be a light that's a white that would be very similar to maybe the cadmium scarlet that I use. Let's see what would it be more like. It'd probably be more like, it might be almost as viscous as the alizarin, but not quite that. That gets a little too watery, but it's very painterly, and what you're going to see is that because white gets in every color, it actually brings that viscosity with it and helps the color note, whatever you're mixing. But I do find also that I put in blacks almost automatically, and even in blue frequently automatically, because those colors tend to be stiffish. But I can add it to those where you can't add it to white. With white, you need to mix it in well because it's going to leave yellow spots. So I don't want yellow spots over time, so I really mix it in well. You would say beat it in or whip it in or whatever, but with blacks you can add it on, and so you can dip in with the brush into the linseed oil and use it. And I do find that certain colors will dry in more. The black is notorious at the second level. The first level, the blacks are pretty good, but at the second level, the blacks will start drying in even with oil in them, and it does help a little bit. And if you're being thin in the darks, that's not a bad thing, to the extent that you're using black. Yeah, you're very welcome, yeah. Adam, thank you for that comment. Yeah, it's my pleasure to do this, but what I'm doing, you could say that my beginning in trying to do this was a marketing thing. It was the idea, getting online at all was trying to show how certain people who claim to be Boston School, well, it's to differentiate my brand, but certain people who claim to be Boston School are painting, Boston School is an Impressionist model. There is no underpainting in an Impressionist painting, and definitely a Boston School one. And I found that one of the well-known people out there who teaches out of the Gamble background was putting underpainting and calling it an Impressionist painting. It's a very different model in terms of the methods. And I was trying to actually show the difference in the methods to differentiate us from the others. And then the further I got into it, I realized nobody's even beginning to paint this way, and it made it even more so. But so you could say it was a marketing thing, but now I just get such pleasure, and I get so many nice responses from you all saying, you've reminded me of what I loved in painting, and those kinds of things. So I'm just trying now to just be this voice in the wilderness that you can all play off of. You can disagree, whatever, but it gives you some noise, out there that you can then pick up and say, but how about if I try it like this? So you know what I mean? So I'm actually projecting ideas into the air. And they're specifically mine because I'm trying to show you what I've found. I'm that weary traveler, somebody referred to as the voyager. I think that was in the Moore book. And by the way, somebody, thank you out there for telling me, I think it was one of you guys, for telling me about that Amy Moore is a woman. I couldn't find anything about that person. So it's very nice to know that. I wondered about it. She reminded me a little bit of Madame Cave. And so it was really interesting. That's a very nice thing to know. I'm very pleased to know that. And I don't know where or anything about, if anybody else any more information about Amy Osborne Moore, who did that book that I've been referring to, The Science of Painting in Art. If you have any more further background, please send it to me or give me a link or something like that. I would really love to see it. I looked up and I just assumed that her name was the guy's name, there was a guy's name because I kept looking up and they said when it's A-I-M-E with accent right there, that's a straight line accent, that it's a guy. So I got poor information. As I said at the time I said it, I said, this is Google, remember? In any case. All right. Anakin, yeah. Well, welcome here. I think we're about to leave town. But you can see, and by the way, I want to, as you're looking at this last screen, thank you, Mr. Producer, for putting that up there, but you can see there's a certain amount of looseness desirable in this. What happened, there's a certain amount of looseness that's inevitable in this, and you want it there, partially so you'll stay loose yourself. This isn't a tightly painted thing, except for those points that I'm talking about. Then at those points, you're trying to be as particularly articulate, at least as to the edge. You're not going to draw every little tiny thing about them, but you're going to be able to articulate the value relationships, the edge relationships, the sharpness of edge, and effect relationships and all that stuff. And you're going to be able to see your big color field. So you have some idea there of what I've done. Any last questions? I think, well, there is no final result. I have to tell you this. I don't usually push these videos, so what I'm trying to say, I'm going to do that though one of these days soon and push the end of this game so you can see how I play the same game over and over again. The way I lay in a painting, I lay in areas, and so the next thing I would be doing in this painting here is going right to the center of interest area. Those flowers up there and some of the areas of the hat, and I'd probably be bringing that whole area to the next level in visual order, bringing all the players to work there and trying to restart that area. But you see that area has a number of players that are already right to all the other spots all around the neighborhood. So when I'm doing that, I'm actually establishing parameters for the next area. So if my edge relationships are right and my effect relationships are right in the new area that I'm about to work on separately, then it becomes to be my anchor for the rest of the painting. So if you can follow that kind of thinking, and then I try not to deviate, but if I do deviate, I'm only doing it because of something outside. You never change the cosmic for the local. This grand relationship thing. That's why your start in our way of working wants to be really impressive. It has to impress you. And I'm not talking about looking at it closely in the drawing way. I'm talking about it's going to impress you that is going to be a painting worth finishing or bringing to whatever level. And this one, certainly I see a lot of pure magic in all sorts of little aspects of this that are part of the greater harmony that is part of the song. So I'm definitely going to push a painting like this. I can't tell you how far this got pushed. It may not have gone any farther. It may literally be. I'll have to ask the student who recorded it. Or I'll just have to look at the sketch. But But I will try to do that for you all. I understand that, and I need to do one and bring you up to speed on the next level stuff, and I will do into the future. I think we're done, Mr. Producer. Or what do you think?
If you are ready.
Are you guys all set out there? I think I've given you a second or two to throw something at me, but I think we're good. So that last bit was pretty significant. I can't think of other things to say, and you're going to have to sort through this idea of the general. Did we wind up with a couple more? Yeah. No, okay. Hit that chat. Okay. All right, guys. Well, all right. So next time I'll try to have a video out for you. I think I'm in trouble this week, am I not, Mr. Producer? Our next video may have to be Sunday. We'll just have to see how it winds up because I think Mr. Producer's out of town or something. I would think I was supposed to get him one for this by today, and I didn't do it. So forgive me, guys. He's throwing up his hands. All right. Take care, guys. See you in the next one. If we can, we'll do a live stream another 4 weeks, as some of you have asked, maybe Sheila or somebody. In the meantime, thank you all for being involved and giving us the questions and conversation.
I don't have an end card.
Take care. See you next time.